Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to the A24 project here on the Nerd Party Network, where every 2 weeks we look at 2 films from the A24 filmography, and sometimes in between we're lucky enough to talk with the actors, writers, directors and talent involved in bringing these films to us. This week I'm joined by Chris Bergoch, the co-writer and producer of the Florida Project. Chris talks to me about breaking into the industry and the start of his working relationship with fellow writer and director Sean Baker, their early career working on Greg the Bunny and Warren the Ape, before moving on to feature films, Starlet, the acclaimed Tangerine, and the Florida Project. Chris takes us behind the long pre-production for the Florida Project, the inspirations, casting, its success, and the film's legacy, and much more. Thanks so much to Chris for joining me, and I hope you enjoy your interview. Me and Dallas will be back next week to discuss It Comes at Night and A Ghost Story. Enjoy the show. I'd love to know what inspired you to pursue a sort of career in film writing and film producing. What kind of took what I would assume is a passion for film and turn it into, I'm going to make this a career?
Wow, yeah, that's definitely a great question. There was no other choice, quite honestly, because I've been making, I hate to, I'm sure you've had many, creative people answer the same cliche answer, but I'm one of those kids who I was making movies ever since I was 9 years old with my friends, and there was just never anything else that was interesting to me. And so, even in school, like throughout high school, I would just sit in the back of the class writing whatever script we were going to be shooting the upcoming weekend. And I don't even honestly know how I got through school, because I was never paying attention. I was always lost in my imagination in the back row, and the teacher calls on you, and you're like, what? Sorry. And so, I was one of those guys, and I would make movies with my friends every weekend. Back then, we had the big VHS camcorders that fit the full-size VHS tape. And that's a heavy thing to lug around. And we're lugging it all over New York City and stuff like that, and New Jersey. And I would bribe my friends, because there would be that point midway through production where everybody's kind of like over it and everybody just wants to do other things, and you're like, okay, wait, we need to still get some scenes with you. Let's figure out a way to shoot you out of this movie. We're gonna make your character die. I'll buy you pizza. I'll buy you your ticket to the movie that we see this weekend. And I had to spend all my allowance money to get people to just keep doing it every weekend. So yeah, that was basically my high school experience. I never really did any extracurricular activities in high school, because I really hated school. I hated all the kids that went. I went to school in northern New Jersey, and I didn't really click with anybody there. So most of my friends were from other towns, and we were sort of like a ragtag band of creative misfits, I guess.
Were any certain films or film talents that kind of really drew you as a young kind of film fan?
Yeah, typical answer there too. I just loved all the 80s Spielberg movies and Back to the Future trilogy, Indiana Jones trilogy back then, and all the Amblin stuff was really the blueprint, like the DNA that I was absorbing, like so many kids. And then movies like Die Hard, of course. And so, what I would do, lots of times, I would take, I'm not going to lie, back then, you're just kind of learning your craft. And so, a lot of times I would weave, scenes that were, inspired from, one movie, and then you take, a little bit of Die Hard, a little bit of Lethal Weapon, and you smash it together into something. I guess that's what Quentin has been accused of doing his whole professional career. But yeah, that's kind of what I was doing back then. And so, when it came time to choose a career, that's what I wanted to do. And I wanted to go to film school. And, oh my gosh, I remember a time, I'll never forget this. I went to my guidance counselor. We're in northern New Jersey. And I guess I was, the first student who ever, from that school, who ever really wanted to do this. And when you go as a junior, I guess in high school, 11th grade, and you're asked what you want to do and start thinking about colleges and stuff like that, universities, and I told him I want to go to film school, and he was so condescending. He was just like, no, Chris, not a hobby. I'm talking about a career. So back then, it wasn't as widely as acceptable as it is now, and normal for people to go and do this as a career. And it was definitely something that I couldn't see myself doing anything else.
And film school was where it sort of brought you and Sean Baker together, was that right?
That is true. Yeah, we both wound up at NYU. We were both growing up in New Jersey, like about an hour on the outskirts of New York City, suburban areas, and we didn't know each other, even though we were probably only about a half an hour away from each other growing up. But we met at NYU, and it was interesting. I think me and all the buddies that I met at NYU were going through the same sort of experience where I could speak for myself, where, I finally was like, hey, I'm going to film school, NYU, great reputation. I'm finally going to meet like-minded people. And that didn't happen right away. For me, when I went to NYU, I found myself sort of feeling even like more of an outcast, because I think the culture at NYU, at least for me, just for me, was I guess crossing paths with a lot of students who were making fun of like movies like Back to the Future for being quote unquote too Hollywood or too mainstream. And there's nothing wrong with Fellini films, but that's what more of the direction they were headed in, and I was more of a Hollywood guy. They're like, oh, you should go to USC, and so I really didn't like it at first, and then I sort of, second semester met people like Sean Baker, and a bunch of other guys, Matthew Huffman, Kurt Leiner, all these guys that I still work with to this day, and we kind of joined forces, all kind of going through the same thing, and again, just formed like a creative little mafia of our own that we could click, and our sensibilities were matching. Because back then, when I met Sean Baker, he wanted to make the next Die Hard, so we were all kind of clicking on movies like that.
Obviously, you mentioned sort of you got this little mafia together, and you went on to make Starlet, which is a film that maybe not too many people perhaps know about compared to maybe sort of Tangerine and the Flora Project. And as I kind of mentioned to you sort of off air, this is a film that I've not had a chance to see here in the UK yet. Can you sort of tell people a bit about how Starlet came to being, and how maybe people might be able to kind of find this one?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and thank you. Yes, Starlet, it's out there. And it's definitely a movie I'm very proud of. It was, lots of times me and Sean, when we make these movies, I still to this day can't believe they exist, because it's always such a struggle. Everybody who's made a movie can say the same story. It's always a struggle getting anything made. So when one finally gets made, and you're seeing it on the big screen, it's like surreal in a way, and it's like hard for my brain to adjust, like, oh wow, people can see this now, they know about it. So thanks for even mentioning it. And basically, what led to Starlet, I'm going to back up a little bit, stop me if I'm rambling, but out of school, we worked with puppets a lot. It all started in film school because, again, actors were very hard they were flaky a lot. I'm not saying that in general, actors are great, but I'm just saying the ones we were dealing with were, you'd schedule a shoot and they would just not show up, and you're not paying them, so there's not really all that much you can do. You can't blame them if they got a job or whatever. So we started working with puppets because they were going to show up, and we can rely on them. And then all those little student film things with puppets led to Greg the Bunny, which is sort of a very sort of cult show that we did that actually had 5 incarnations. We started it on New York Public Access, and then it went to the Independent Film Channel, and then we jumped to Fox, where we had this sort of show that was the showrunner was Steve Levitan, which most people know from Modern Family, and that was a show that had Seth Green, Sarah Silverman, Eugene Levy. So we had all these big names that people we loved working with it, but that was also the most watered down version of it, and not what I consider the authentic version of it. And so then we had a chance to jump back to the Independent Film Channel and do a series of film parodies with these puppet characters. That was so much fun, and we can have them swear, and we can have nudity, and there was no rules. So that was really fun. And then finally, years later, MTV approached us, and they wanted to do a spin-off about this character, Warren the Ape. And Warren he's a degenerate, drunken gambler, ape puppet, and he wants to make his comeback. And so, it was really fun to do this MTV show in 2010 because we got to have the whole gang come back together, like Sarah Silverman, Eugene Levy, and Seth Green playing themselves as actors that formerly acted with this puppet and, wanted nothing to do with him because he's a terrible, terrible person. So that show did a lot of stunt casting, being on MTV, and they wanted to appeal to a young, male demographic at the time. We would have these cameos by porn stars, and so this was the seeds of Starlet, because we were on set with some of these adult film stars, male and female, and I guess I was guilty of having preconceived notions of what I thought they might be like, but it was anything but, and they were just regular old people with regular old problems like you and I. And I remember talking to this one girl who we were talking about bed bugs, because at the time bed bugs were like plaguing every hotel room in America. And she was talking about how she went to Vegas and stayed at the Wynn, which is known as one of the most, expensive nights in Vegas, ritzy resort, but even they were, not safe from these bed bugs. So we were talking basically about how to, check your bed if you don't want to leave your room if there's little dots in the bed from the bed bug. So that got the ball rolling. Like, wow, what if we do a film that centered around one of these girls, but didn't focus on what she did for a living, which is this extraordinary, crazy job, and just focus on her everyday life in LA. And then Sean had a film that, we always have this, what I call the idea vault, little half-baked ideas that we tuck away and, never know how they're going to evolve. And he had a film that he always wanted to do based on something that happened to a friend of his father's, where someone found some money. And they had this moral dilemma. They didn't know whether or not they should tell the person they found the money, or if the person was never going to miss it, if they should keep the money. And so that kind of, I was like, hey, Sean, remember that old, idea of yours? What if we infuse that into this idea and kind of meld the two ideas, and that became the Starlet script. That we started really having fun writing this story about this unlikely friendship, about this 21-year-old, female in the San Fernando Valley in LA, and the unlikely friendship that she forms with this 85-year-old woman, that she buys a vase, a thermos at her garage sale, and in the thermos is all this cash that's stashed inside. And so she's trying to figure out if she should give the money back to this old woman, or if she'll never miss it, like I said. So should she just keep it? And she tries actually to feel this woman out, to see if she deserves her to do the right thing, basically. And it's a fun little friendship story. And we got lucky enough to get some great reviews. And it was after Starlet that we really wanted to do the Florida project. And I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit and talking way too much, so I'm going to let you get to that. But I just wanted to plant that seed that it was Starlet in 2012, and then we thought Florida project would be next, but it proved to be very difficult to get Florida project made after that.
Obviously, sort of Florida project didn't follow. It was Tangerine, and that was a film that caught everyone by surprise. The buzz for this film sort of came out of nowhere. It topped a lot of best of the year lists. How did Tangerine come into being?
So with Tangerine, Mark Duplass was a fan of Sean's films, mainly one called Prince of Broadway that Sean had done before Starlet, and we had sort of a standing offer from Mark where he said, Florida Project's budget was going to be more than he was looking for in finding financing for films. Mark's talked at great length about it, and he wanted to find something much smaller. And he, had this standing offer to Sean where if you have something that could fit more into that micro budget range, just feel free to come talk to me. And we had this open invitation, and Sean and I had apartments in Hollywood right next to this place, Donut Time. And so every time you go out of your house, you're seeing some down and dirty shenanigans happening in front of Donut Time. And we always kind of just joked about like, we got to do a movie there someday. Never really thinking we would at the time, years ago. This is like, back in the Greg the Bunny days. And the funniest thing is we never even went into Donut Time until we started shooting that movie, because it just seemed like a little bit sketchy in there. Lots of drug deals happening, down right in front of it and stuff. But it also was sort of this unofficial red light district with, trans prostitutes. We never really knew what Tangerine was going to be about. We just wanted to explore finding a story around Donut Time because we were just so fascinated with that corner. Hollywood and Highland. I'm sorry, Santa Monica Boulevard and Highland, right in the heart of Hollywood. And so we hit the streets, and we were trying to figure out, okay, what could, for all we knew, the movie would be just about donuts and donut time. So we always try to find collaborators from wherever we're doing the movie. Like with Starlet, we met extensively with male and female adult film stars just to hear their stories. Not wanting to copy any story in particular at all, but just to sort of get a flavor from the backdrop of what we're embarking on and what we're going to write about, because we're not from these walks of life. So with this, we were walking around the streets, literally just going up to anyone that would let us talk to them, and no one would. And we felt maybe they thought we were police or something. Walking up to people, lingering, probably not there with the best intentions. Who knows what they're up to? Drug dealer types. And so basically, we got a lot of rejections and people just walking away from us. And then the fates had a good one in store for us, because we crossed paths with Maya Taylor, and she greeted us with open arms. We meet her right there in the back of Donut Time. There's this sort of LGBTQ center, and she just happened to be coming out of it. And we approached her like everybody else, and she's just like, "Come and sit down. I'll tell you anything you want to know." And the ball got rolling from there. Like she was happy to tell us just all sorts of stuff about the area and the ins and outs, and then told us that we needed to meet her roommate, Kiki Rodriguez, who plays Cindy in the film, and they were roommates at the time. And so we actually wound up. I don't know if you've ever heard of this fast food chain called Jack in the Box. Yeah, it's very greasy. People joke and call it Jack in the Cracker. And it's basically the scene in the movie, if anybody goes back and watches, when Razmik, the cab driver, pulls in and asks, toward the end of the film, he's trying to track down Cindy, and then this sort of faceless streetwalker reveals that she's at Donut Time. That's the actual Jack in the Box that we had our first meeting with them. And we just took them there. We said, "Hey, where do you want to go? We'll take you anywhere." And that's where they chose. And we sat there for like hours and hours. And, the first meeting, we're just meeting them thinking they're going to be, potential collaborators on this film and keep things authentic for us, And the more we met with them, every time we met with them, it was like we couldn't stop laughing just at their dynamic and their rapport. And it was they were so funny, and they were like the perfect dynamic duo. And so one day, like, I guess maybe it might have been the third meeting or whatever, Sean and I were just like, what if they're the stars? Like, do we even have to cast this movie? What if we just center it around them? And yeah, the rest is history.
How important was it for you to have that representation on screen? That there's been a lot of debate recently about certain actors saying, I can play any role, whether it's a person of a minority or a background, transgender. How important was it for you that...
Yeah. Johansson,
yeah.
You're referring to.
Absolutely, yeah. And how did it feel for you to... Because you didn't just talk representation, you put that representation front and center. These people have informed your script, informed the story, and they're the leads in this movie. Like, how important was that representation for you?
Oh, it was really important. So the thing is like, but here's the trick of it. We wanted it to be authentic and real and raw, but never exploitive. And that's the balancing act, right? Because we never intended it to be so much of a comedy. And it was Maya who I remember saying, like, if you're going to make this movie, I want to laugh. I want to laugh at it because our lives are crazy and it should be reflected. And Sean was, like, all right, okay, are you sure? Because, we don't want anybody to think that we're being exploitive. So, the trick is having the people who you're working with and teaming up with really there every step of the way, so you don't make a misstep. And it's just so important to have that representation, but then, correctly. Because, it would be easy for someone to say, hey, we're going to cast these girls as the leads, but then impose their sort of outsider viewpoint on what they think their lives are. And I think that would be the biggest mistake, you know?
One of the things that I find so fascinating about Tangerine was obviously it was shot using an iPhone, and there's always so much to be about shooting a film that way and the pros and the cons of it. But I'm curious for you as a script writer, what are the pros and cons of writing round thinking an iPhone is potentially going to be shooting this film? Does it make any difference to you, or do you sort of have to inform and write in a different way?
Oh, well, that's good. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. First of all, first and foremost, it's just another tool to tell your story. So just like, when I have my writer's cap on, it doesn't necessarily matter what you're shooting on, it's just a tool to capture the story and the characters that you're trying to make the audience care about and give a damn about. And, but now in this movie, it wasn't like we were just trying to do some gimmick, it was just literally because this was Sean, we basically called in all our favors, to be honest. And there was just nobody that was going to lend us a rent. There was nobody at that point that was going to do any of this. And we were cashed out. And, with the budget that we were working with, which was just about $100,000, which is, if we had $100,000 in our pocket right now, it would be wonderful and it would solve all our problems and get me out of credit card debt. But for a movie, it's nothing. It's nothing. And so, you have to figure out how you're going to make this work and what corners you're going to cut to be able to get a movie and a feature film in for that budget. And so shooting it on the iPhone definitely solved a whole bunch of problems because there were no big rigs and lenses and all that stuff to worry about. And then even more so, the happy accident, at least, some people have varying opinions on this, but really my opinion is that Tangerine would not have been the Tangerine everybody knows without shooting it on the iPhone, because it allowed us to really get really raw and just down and dirty and in the trenches. And when you're making a movie like this, so run and gun, and you're hopping on buses and all that, if you have these big giant, we're cinephiles. Sean would have loved nothing more than to shoot that on 35. But looking back, if we had a 35 millimeter rig and the lighting that it takes and all that stuff, you would have never had that spontaneity and that raw quality that I think the movie that oozes onto the screen. And then there's also a third thing that I want to point out, and that is that everybody is, filming their lives and taking selfies and Instagramming and tweeting every minute. And so I think for these first-time actors, it was no different. And it was sort of like, if an iPhone's pointed on you, you're going to be more natural, I feel. And if there's like a giant lens in your face, you might not be. And so that really affected, just the comfortable nature on set, where we had a lot of first-time actors and the camera was non-existent. So everybody could really just kind of be very comfortable, and it's no different than them taking selfies of themselves, I guess I'm trying to say.
We'd mentioned sort of this film sort of came out of nowhere for a lot of people and the buzz that followed. When the film was released, was there a moment that you realised this film's kind of broken through here? The people that we want to get this film to are seeing it and finding it and enjoying it. Was there a moment that stood out for you of like, I think we've maybe made something really special here when it had been released?
Oh, wow. That took a long while for me to get to that mental place, because I just remember Sean and I both were sick to our stomachs before that premiere at Sundance. I mean, I think we both vomited because, we were so nervous. Like, what have we done? This is a crazy movie. Are people going to start throwing stuff at us? We didn't know what to expect. And then the momentum started happening where there were 5 screenings at Sundance. And I went to all of them, and I remember that I guess word was starting to get out, because I didn't feel like that first screening there was a lot of laughter. And I felt like maybe the jokes were falling flat. And then as the screenings went on, I felt like the laughter was getting more and more apparent. And it's like, wow, this is a really fascinating thing where people are sort of discovering it's okay to laugh with this movie, and that it's supposed to be this fun romp. And that was really a relief. And then I guess it was sort of after Sundance when people started tweeting about it that maybe it started resonating with me. Like, okay, maybe I shouldn't worry so much. But I'm just a neurotic writer by nature. I'm never going to stop worrying. I'm always, even to this day, it hasn't really fully sunk in that people enjoy the movie, because it's not everybody's cup of tea. I mean, there's people that we saw walking out of the theater. We don't really mind that though, but it's, we recognize that we're not making movies that are for everyone.
When did you sort of realize that after sort of the success of Tangerine that you could now maybe make the Florida Project, and what was the sort of development like for that film?
Yeah, so that was the key. So we tried to get Florida Project going. Yeah, back up to 2011. So we were in the midst of Starlet, and we shot Starlet in September of 2011. So basically, this was a little bit before, and my mom had relocated to Orlando from New Jersey, and up until that point, whenever I had visited Orlando, because I'm a big Disney guy, right? Like, I love the theme parks, and so, like, growing up on the East Coast, I would always go to Disney World as a kid, but I had never gone out. It's huge. I don't know if you've ever been. It's 43 square miles, and I had never been outside of that bubble of the magic, and so, like, it wasn't until my mom moved down there where it was like the first time I got to see on the outskirts of the resort, and there's like a lot of situations that are anything but magical, and I was driving. Whenever I would go down there to visit my mom, I would borrow her car to go to the theme parks, and so you have to travel from where she lived on that Route 192 that you see in the Florida Project, a stretch of motels, and that's when it came to my attention that there were families that were living in the motels, and that hadn't been on my radar, and it was very heartbreaking that there were these kids, and you literally could see the fireworks from the Disney theme parks so close, but yet so far, never having been, and that was that tugged on my heartstrings. But the real spark was like when I was at a red light, because there's a whole bunch of these red lights, and every time you're at a red light, there was like another motel with a parking lot filled with just another group of kids, like playing tag or whatever, and all these games that I used to play when I was a kid, and that I find that a lot of kids today, that they don't go out and just play anymore and be kids because they're just so buried in their iPads and their iPhones. And so it was really cool because I saw like this one group of kids doing what I used to do. I used to like go to a baseball field, and you would think, oh, to play baseball? No, it was to draw like with a stick in the baselines. Like, you would draw spaceships. I'm talking about like elementary school days, and just pretend you're like flying in the spaceship that you drew. And so like, they were doing stuff like that. In this case, they were like drawing in chalk, and they were like drawing homes, and they were like pretending that, oh, this is my house. Look at my big living room. And it was just a chalk drawing. And so I was like, oh, that's so cool. They were making their own magic, and that was the spark that they did. They were so close. They didn't need to spend $150 a day to go to the theme parks because they were making their own. And that was the sort of impetus of the script, of the idea that I pitched to Sean, who loved it because he is a big fan of the Little Rascals and the Our Gang series, that he always wanted to sort of find a way to do a modern version of like the Little Rascals. And this fit perfectly into that goal for him. And so we instantly knew that after Starlet, this would be the next one. But like I said, it was definitely hard to find. At that time, we were even just looking for about $1 million budget. And that's just because, even though $1 million is still very inexpensive for a feature film, compared to like Marvel films. But for this, there was a lot of locations. There was going to be more actors. So that was the budget we were playing around with at the time. And it was just really hard to get anybody to write a check for $1 million about the homelessness issue in the U.S. And so it was a struggle. Every time I would go into the pitch meetings, you would see the eyes rolling, like, oh, okay, what else do you got? And we're like looking at the watch. Is the meeting over yet? So yeah, that's what led us to do Tangerine. And then Tangerine's success, critical success, kind of opened more doors for us, allowing more trust. And we could finally get that dream alive. I never, ever thought we would ever be able to make the Florida Project, just from all the no's.
When you sort of decided, right, we can now start making this movie, it's go. What was the research process like to be able to bring these kind of characters to the script and to develop a story for the film?
Oh yeah. Well, I've joked before that I was researching this movie all my life because, ever since the first time, 4 years old, that I went to Disney World, there were all these roadside places like the Magic Castle and the Wizard gift shop that I knew, like, I wanted to feature in the film. And a lot of times, just like with Donut Time in Tangerine, a lot of times we love stitching together locations into a script and figuring out, like, how could these locations serve a purpose in our script. So we were collecting ideas of places that we wanted to feature in the script and trying to weave a story through them. And that was the first step. And then the second step is we always had the ending. Ever since one of the initial phone calls when I was pitching to Sean, we always knew, I don't know how we always knew, but we always knew that we wanted the movie to end with this flight of fancy to the parks. And, it went through a lot of, just as all scripts do, it went through a lot of morphing, evolving. It wasn't always two girls who were friends. It was a little girl and a little boy with, like, a little romance in there. And the ages fluctuated and all that. But anyway, the basic premise of the fleeing, a dramatic flee from the motel was always there. And then you had to sort of reverse engineer it, if you will, and sort of figure out, like, what gets us there. So the whole thing was very unconventional, the way we approached it, and then we took many trips. Sean and I would always, over the course of a year or two, like 2 years, because before we even got financing, we were actually going down there, because Sean was sort of curious to see it, and we would spend a week at a time in some of the motels, and doing the same thing that I described trying to do with Tangerine. We're just walking around, introducing ourselves, telling people what we were looking to do, seeing if they would just tell us about their lives there, take them out to lunch. And I guess the main thing is to sort of not, to get trust that we're not going to be exploitive, and try to make them know what we're up to. And the more people could tell us, about their lives there, the more it'll inform the script to be accurate. And so we really kind of got lucky with one day meeting a manager of one of the motels named John Manning, who was a huge resource for us. Don't know what we would have done without him. And that's what it's all about. That's why you have to do the research when you're making movies like this, or else I'm not so sure how they're going to be accurate.
One thing people often talk about when they think about the Florida Project, it's either a testament to the writing or the acting or both, is how much of that script is improvised by the actors and the kids, and how much free reign do they have, or are they very much actually working to a script but they just deliver it so well because you've put in that time and effort into research, and that the dialogue you're writing is true to these type of people and not just sort of generic kind of scripts?
Yeah, no, it's definitely okay. So there's always scripts, and let me back it up to Tangerine. So, like, on Tangerine, I'll give you a perfect example. We had this script for Tangerine where a lot of times, so it was always important. You always have to get from A to Z in a scene, right? And the scene should always be moving it forward. And a lot of times, there's little key bits of dialogue that need to be hit for that reason. But lots of times, it was very collaborative with Maya and Kiki on the set, because let's say we had a line of dialogue in there, and it said something like, I'm trying to think here, it just said something kind of simple, like, that is not cool. And Maya would just be like, no way, I am not saying that. Like, all right, what's the problem, Maya? Why won't you say that? And she's like, that is not what I would ever say. Okay, how would you say it then? And she would be like, that is not the T. And, that's an example of something I would have never written, that is not the T. And you have this great line of authentic dialogue that rings true because of that. So it's basically this collaboration where she's saying the same thing that was written in her own way, and that really helps. But it's never completely improv, except in certain moments in Tangerine, there were those scenes where it's just like Cindy and Alexandra walk down the street and bicker, and we would just like need that little fill-in scene where we're following them walking, and we did want to encourage improv, and so we have lots of fun stuff with that. Now with Florida Project, that was more difficult because we actually had, like 104 page, 102, something like that, page script. And so basically, the kids... let me back up to casting. So that was a key issue for us. We needed children that could do both improv and memorize lines. And we were having a challenge finding one or the other. And so there were certain kids, we would create these sides, like little bits of dialogue that you send to actors before they come to an audition, and they would be able to hit them great. Like they memorized every single word for word, and did it great. And then when we would do some, little improv exercises, I remember one that we would always do because we knew the pool would play into the film. So we would just be like, all right, so there's these 12 and 13-year-old boys in the pool. They don't know that's your pool, so go kick them out. And they wouldn't know what to do. They just were like frozen, and they were just like, get out of the pool. So that was tricky. And then we would find other kids who could do that exercise amazing, and they were like cracking us up, but they were freezing up whenever you gave them the script, and they couldn't do that. They couldn't memorize lines or, act them out. So that was a challenge. And when Brooklyn walked into the room, we were getting into panic mode. There was only 1 month to go before production was supposed to begin. So we're in May of 2016. We were scheduled to start shooting June. And we had no Mooney, and we had no Jancy. And it was terrible because we were like, are we going to have to delay production? And the whole goal was that we wanted to shoot in the summer when the kids were off from school. And so then when Brooklyn walked in, it was amazing because she just walks in, and before we even get going, she walks into the room and she's just like, okay, before we begin, I've got to do my warm-up exercises. And she starts doing these like push-ups, and we're just like, okay, and we're like already like thinking like this is so Mooney, and then she could do the lines as scripted, she could do the improv, and she was like our little good luck charm, because then once we knew we found our Mooney, everything started magically falling into place. And Sean discovered Valeria in Target with her mom and told her about the auditions we were having, and then she comes in and she clicked with Brooklyn so well, and they were such a great team. And Christopher Rivera, who played Scooty, and they can all do it all. And so then on set, we had an acting coach called Samantha Kwan, who was also just so invaluable and amazing because she was working with the kids the whole time to have them memorize the lines and literally really appreciate what each scene was about. So then, when we're actually shooting, they're able to go off script and make it their own. And then you have this sort of mesh where they're following the script, they're also making it their own, and it's this whole sort of like half and half thing where because you see, you can't really just have the kids improv because then they're just going to talk about SpongeBob the whole time, and they're going to just want to, like, I remember all they kept doing was twerking, which is like a lot of it made it into the movie. You see a couple of those scenes, but like that's all it would have been. So like you need to keep them on script, but also let them do their thing, if that makes sense. Or else if you just kept them on script like an Aaron Sorkin movie, where they had to hit every single ellipses, it wouldn't ring true. It just wouldn't feel natural.
One thing I'd read was that when Sean was looking to get Willem Dafoe involved, he sat down and Willem, compared to a lot of other people that were maybe interested in the role or you'd spoken to, he just got it in a way that a lot of other people didn't. What was it like to get someone like him involved? Was there a worry that when you think of your other kind of previous work and the rest of the cast, these are all unknowns, was there a worry that people might look at this and think, oh, that's that bad guy from that movie, or hey, that's that notable face? Was there any sort of worry about that? And what was it about this film that it really struck with Willem so much that he was like, I want to be involved?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Lee, because like it is a concern, and we always write. So for me, like I was writing the script with the part of Haley with Britney Spears in mind. but we were never going to really. The thought was we would never actually approach Brittany to play it. It was just sort of a framework for my mind to sort of picture. I really need to picture people when I'm writing a script, even if they're not going to play the role, if that makes sense. And plus we thought Brittany would be fun because of her Mouseketeer roots, so it would be kind of meta. But the reason why I bring Brittany up is because, Sean is the one that's always saying, like, yeah, but we can't, it wouldn't really work for what I'm trying to do with this film to have international, music star / millionaire Britney Spears playing this homeless woman. He wanted a fresh face. He really wanted a first-timer to play Haley. It makes real good sense. And so there's always that concern, and I think Sean had it for Willem. But we're both fans, for a long time with him, and he liked Tangerine. And so Sean's agency set up a meeting. We were in Florida already in pre-production on this movie in the spring of 2016, and we got word that Willem would be willing to meet Sean. And Sean went up to New York just for the weekend, just to meet him, to sort of mention this to him and sort of, gauge his interest. And he was ready because he just liked, what Sean was all about, the kind of films that he was doing. And Sean explained to him what the process would be like, and working with a lot of first timers. And I think, from what I remember Sean saying, I didn't go to New York for that meeting, but he was very jazzed at that concept. It was like sort of a very intriguing concept for him to jump into something like this. And I think Sean sort of felt in Willem's case that he's such a guy who could fall into the role and lose, that the Willem Dafoe-ness of Willem Dafoe, if that makes sense, and sort of put the Green Goblin out of everybody's head, which all the kids loved him as, and just fall into the role of Bobby. And it was also great because we originally had the role of Bobby, and Bobby had a sort of a right-hand man that we always were writing with, like a Steve Buscemi kind of guy in mind. And what we did was we combined those two roles, because now if you're going to have Willem Dafoe in the movie, you got to give him more to do, right? And so it benefited the script in the sense that it kind of encouraged us to combine those two roles and give Bobby more weight.
What was it like when Willem Dafoe, obviously this is skipping ahead a little bit, but just while we're kind of touching on Bobby, that people loved this character, and that he went on to be nominated for the Academy Award for that role as well. What was that like, seeing a character that you'd written, Dafoe just absolutely nails it, and then to kind of get that validation of an Academy Award nomination?
Yeah, that was really a great experience for me, just the sense of, because Willem was a great guy to work with, and he really plussed it off the page, and we always wanted to write the role. Remember I mentioned this guy named John Manning, one of the managers at one of the motels, and he was a great resource of stories and guidance into that world. And it was through him that we kind of got that first sense of sort of a lot of these guys and gals who are in this position managing these motels, right? They might have just signed up and it was just going to be a job. They didn't know they were going to become like a surrogate parental figure to some of these people. They didn't know they were going to be dealing with people living there. And so they kind of get thrust into this situation that they weren't even really prepared for. And so there's that line where they have to do their job, and if people aren't paying, they have to evict them. But there's also a lot of heart there, where it's you can't just be that cruel to not try to work with these people as much as possible. And we love that. We love any time there's a character thrust in a situation they weren't ready for. You're starting off on the right foot. So, and then for him to come in and actually give it that heart and humanity and warmth that he did, I mean, that's beyond anything we could have hoped for.
One thing that we've spoken a lot about the characters in this film, the flesh and blood ones, but one that I don't know if it's caught you by surprise, but the Magic Castle Hotel, that this hotel has become part of the iconography of the film. It's a character in the film. You see so many art and design illustrations. People that are on holiday in Disneyland are now visiting this hotel, sort of a tourist thing. When I was watching it with my girlfriend the other day, it's been decades since either of us have gone to sort of Florida and Disney World. We're like, I'm pretty sure I recognise that ice cream shop or that big tourist Disney gift shop. What's it been like to see the Magic Castle Hotel become a character in this film? When you were shooting it, did you think, oh yeah, this is kind of a nice set here? And has it surprised you sort of how people have attached to the hotel afterwards? Or was it always one of those ones going, for us, this is a character in the film too?
Okay, so I love this question because I'm so excited about this. I go on Instagram regularly just to search. It's hard to do with the hashtag. If you do hashtag Magic Castle, it's tricky because there's a Magic Castle here in Hollywood, which is a home for, it's like the international home for magicians. And so lots of times that'll come up. And they also have a Magic Castle hotel adjacent to it. So what I do is I actually search by the location. And then you'll see tons of the pictures. People are making these pilgrimages to it, taking pictures and like recreating moments from the movie. And that to me is like the ultimate dream come true. And I'm not kidding, because that's what I do. I'm such a film fan and film geek that like I'll go to the Puente Hills Mall, which is like the Twin Pines Mall from Back to the Future, and I'll like, I want to step where Marty McFly stepped. So like it's the same thing, and that's the ultimate compliment, and it freaks me out that people are doing that. It's so cool. I want to actually, I've been meaning to. I've posted a lot of the fan art from around the world, which, like you mentioned, is so incredible. So much fan art every day on Instagram. And I try to do the best I can to save it all. So eventually I'll just keep, spamming people with more and more of it. But I want to do I also want to find like some of the best, poses and do a post on that because there's so many and people are being really creative. And we did, to answer the first part of your question though, we knew it had to be the Magic Castle. We had to get the Magic Castle. I actually stayed there in 1995 because what I would do is I would go to Disney World, with my friends and basically just put the whole trip on credit cards because we couldn't afford to do what we were doing. And so like we'd always want to stay one night in an expensive Disney resort. And then like the other 6 nights, we would balance it out by staying at one of the cheap hotels outside of Disney World. And Magic Castle was the one we stayed at that year. And it still looks the same. It was always purple. People think we painted it for the film, but no, it's what it always looked like. And the whole thinking was that, she doesn't need the Magic Kingdom and Cinderella Castle, which is in there, because she's got her own castle. She lives in one. And that, when you're, 6 years old, that would be the coolest thing in the world. And she's like the master of it. And so that became a theme that we wanted to explore anywhere we could in this movie. And we wanted to draw parallels. So like if the Magic Castle was her Magic Kingdom, that's why you have Futureland Motel where Jancy stays right next door. That's completely invented for the film. Even though there really is a Magic Castle, there's no Futureland. But we wanted it to be called that because that would be sort of like, well, if Magic Castle was Magic Kingdom, we wanted Jancy to come from Epcot, which was the second park that was built over there. And originally they have, Disney Hollywood Studios, and it used to be called Disney MGM Studios. I hate the name change, but the point was we were going to have a Tinseltown Motel, and then, some things you lose from one script to another, but you get the idea. And so the things that stuck were when they were making their own magic, when they go to those abandoned condos, that's their haunted mansion. And when they go on the safari, when Mooney takes Jancy on a safari, that's sort of supposed to be their version of this attraction called Kilimanjaro Safaris at the Animal Kingdom Park. And so we had all these things where we were just trying to draw parallels as wherever we could to the actual attractions in the parks.
What was it like for you? Obviously, you stayed at the Magic Castle Hotel. How does it feel to, look back on that moment and think, I stayed there as a kind of Disney guy, playing with the credit cards, and here I am now, a producer, co-writer on this film, and we are shooting here. Was that a sort of pinch me moment?
It was definitely, the whole movie was pinch me moment, because I also, the wizard, the gift shop that looks like a big wizard, I had, stopped there with my family growing up. So I was just thinking, like, who would have ever thought that this, would come to this? And that, that was pretty special for me. And it's great that people are actually going to stay at the Magic Castle now. I actually stopped in there to say hello to all the old gang there that were nice enough to let us shoot there and all that. And I told them, like, they should charge people, like special Florida Project packages to stay in room 323, which is Haley's room. But I don't think they're thinking like that. If it were me running the place, I would put like an animatronic Gloria by the pool, smoking. But I don't think they're into that.
You'd kind of mentioned the closing shot was always in your mind, and you were actually one of the few people on set for that final shot as the girls run into Magic Kingdom, and it was done guerrilla style with a return to the iPhone. Did you realize when you were shooting that how special that scene would become and how much discussion it would generate, that people have said, hey, that never happened, it's sort of just a mental breakdown, or it definitely happened, they kind of snuck in. Did you ever realize the importance that scene would kind of play in the mind of viewers?
Oh, wow. Well, you've done your research. That's impressive. Yeah, no, it was definitely had to be a skeleton crew. Because, yes, as you said, it was a return to the iPhone 6S Plus, I think, at that point.
My research didn't extend as far as knowing the iPhone there.
Yeah, it was the latest model at the time, 6S Plus, and we put it on the old Steadicam Smoothie that we used for Tangerine. And, oh, no, we didn't. Actually, we were going to, but we abandoned the Steadicam Smoothies for fear of calling attention to ourselves. So that was literally Alexis Zabe hand holding it. Wow, I forgot about that. Yeah, lots of spur of the moment changes in that sequence, and we had a lot more. Hopefully someday there'll be another edition that comes out with a lot more missing scenes. There were no missing deleted scenes in this Blu-ray, but yeah, the sequence was very long. We basically had them traveling through more of the locations that you previously saw in the film, because it was really important. I always called it the Wizard of Oz ending, where you have some people that think you want to believe Dorothy really went to Oz, and then the other people that are just like, of course she didn't go to Oz. She wakes up and it was a dream, and her friend, the guys look like the Scarecrow and the Tin Man. But the thing is I like that debate. And we wanted that debate where it's like, did they really literally go there? Or is it more of just we're seeing their point of view and clicking into their, imagination for the first time? And so that was intentional, but the thing is after trimming a lot of the locations down, there's still some that I'm glad are retained. And that is that if you really watch closely, they do run through the parking lot that they were dropped off at earlier to see the fireworks, because the idea was that Jancy would remember how to retrace their steps to get to the parks. Because it was important for me for it to technically, like, it could be real, it could be a literal ending, and they could have remembered. They're not that far, and they could have hopped a bus. If you're at the Magic Castle in real life, there's a public bus that you can hop on that would take you to Disney property, and then you can hop on the monorail that takes you right up to the Magic Kingdom. And we actually had footage of all that. We shot them on the monorail, getting on and off the monorail. It just would have been too long. But they still go through that parking lot that I think is the key to sort of, debating whether or not they could have actually remembered how to go there.
When did sort of A24 become involved in wanting to kind of distribute your film, and what was it like for you guys to hear that they wanted to add your film to their filmography, and what was their pitch to go, come with us, we want to put your film out there?
Well, we were at Cannes, which we were very lucky. That's another dream upon a dream coming true. I never thought I would have to be involved in a film that would get to Cannes, being a guy who, was always leaning more toward the mainstream side of things. And, there was a bidding war going on. And when you're in that situation, it's really important to Sean. What I think is one of the most important things to our team is to be able to have people see these films in theaters. Because like I said, even though it's a changing world and it's harder and harder to get your screen, we really, really love the theatrical experience and feel like there's nothing like it. That's why I'm like so happy that Netflix is releasing The Irishman in selected theaters this fall. Because I was worried about that. I'm like, I don't want to watch the new Martin Scorsese picture on my iPad on Netflix. So that's really awesome. Anyway, so that's important. And so like part of the the decision is like, what are these places offering you? You know, you can be in a situation. I'm not specifically talking about the Florida project here, just kind of meshing every story together. You could be in situations where you're lucky enough to have a film that people want to distribute, but then one might be giving you, hey, do you go with the one that's giving you more money, but they only want to release it in New York and LA, or do you go for a little less money, but you know they're going to put it in 30 screens across the U.S. and there's lots to factor in, and will they be open to doing a Blu-ray or DVD, which again is just a dying thing, and pretty soon there won't be. But as long as they still make them, we still want that to be a thing, and so all that goes into it. And I personally weren't at those big time negotiation meetings, and you have salespeople helping you out with but that was all sort of like part of the thing. And A24, being as cool as they are, they're the ones that were giving us everything, and just amazing people to work with over there. Hope we could do it again, because they just really got the film. So they really got the vibe when it came to like cutting the trailer. This was the first time that we were involved with seriously like handing over everything and having these people just like create a trailer, create posters, and it's like they not only do they understand the vibe of how all the marketing should be, but they were willing to hear Sean's notes, and I don't think a lot of people would be down to collaborate with a filmmaker like that. I mean, unless you're talking about Christopher Nolan's of the world and all that.
I remember that film had a huge marketing push, even here in the UK, that obviously you talk on, we want to get it there in cinemas in America, but it had a really big kind of push here, and it was popular here in the UK, and you always see the DVD and Blu-ray for kind of sale here as well.
Oh, I love the UK poster so much.
It's so good, that blue one. I don't, is that the American one's obviously Mooney sort of running through the Magic Hotel. With the one here, is that blue one? I love that poster.
Yeah, with the shopping cart.
Yeah,
right? With her. Yeah, because I love how we get to see Haley in it, and it's just you could feel that sort of magic between the mother and the daughter in that poster really shining through.
With the marketing and stuff, when was the moment for you that you felt the Florida project had really broken out? That again, this was a film that you're saying it was a small budget, but it's exploded. That it's become this thing where it's on Instagram. People are designing art. I think people have got different tattoos that Haley has got. When was the moment that you thought, I think we're becoming sort of part of the discussion here? It's not just another indie film that went to Cannes and was released by A24 or whatever. It was something that people were talking about and excited about.
Gosh, I just don't know if that ever happens to me. I know that sounds lame, but it really doesn't, because it's sort of like when that's all happening, we're always trying to get the next one going, and it sort of never becomes completely easy. We're working on this love story right now. It's an unconventional love story, and it's sort of like, again, you just want to find the right people to work with, and not everybody really always wants to take that chance, especially when Sean wants to do some of the creative decisions he wants to do. And at the same time, while I continue to maintain that collaboration with Sean Baker, I'm also trying to take meetings at the studios, and I really would love to write bigger budgeted family films, and that's also a whole other completely unique set of challenges of trying to move through that system. So we're trying to just keep moving forward, and I guess unless I hit Instagram, I'm not really that in sync with all that. So it's really awesome when people send me or tag me in something, and I'm like, oh my god, like you said, oh my god, that person got that tattoo, that's amazing. That's the only time. It feels really nice, because it just reminds me okay, people really this movie seems to resonate with them, and that's just a dream, because we never really know for sure when we're making a movie like that if people are going to be bored, because it's not following traditional structure, and a lot of it's sort of like throwing some screenplay 101 rules out the window, and that's always tricky for me, because I'm programmed that way. I'm programmed with this has to happen on page 10, and this has to happen here in first, second, third act, and every scene needs to move it forward. And on this movie, there were so many see, Sean and I never fight or debate. Really, we just have these amazing conversations, and that's why I like. And when we disagree, we disagree in a really cool way. And so, like, that's why I love working with him. And on this movie, the conversation kept coming up where it's like I didn't want people to be bored, and he kept saying, "Well, I want people to spend like we're feel like we're spending a summer with these characters." And so it is always like meeting somewhere in the middle of those two viewpoints.
We always ask people on this podcast what are some of their favourite A24 films or things that have kind of stuck with them. And the Florida Project seems to be, we've interviewed composers, writers, directors, actors, and the Florida Project seems to be the one that always kind of pops up. What are some of your favourite films from the A24 catalogue?
Oh, wow. Well, last year, 8th Grade was one of my favorite films of the year. I loved it so much. And I had loved Bo Burnham before that. And so seeing him being able to, like, you know, level up to his first feature, do a film like that, was just awesome. Let's see. American Honey. Definitely. And Swiss Army Man was A24, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. And that's such an inspiring film for me. And let me tell you why. Like, films like A Swiss Army Man, The Lobster, and everything else that he's directed, you know, those movies are so inspiring to me because I spend my life, like, going into pitch meetings trying to make people, like, understand what's going on in my brain, right? Like, in my little imagination vortex. And it's so difficult, even when you have the most, you know, structured, easy to digest story. There's always this sort of like spoon feeding process that I have to adjust to make sure, you know, not everybody can see inside your brain, and you really have to kind of be a master showman to try to get them in there. So I have no idea how anybody, you know, could understand what they were trying to do with the movie like Swiss Army Man and say yes to it. That gives me hope for the planet Earth, that movie like that gets on the screen. Like, that's what keeps me going.
Definitely. And my penultimate question is one that I will regret if I don't ask you this. So I did, like, as you mentioned, I like to do a bit of research about my guests and, you know, their work and so on. And I always find IMDb is a great kind of resource for some information, some trivia and background. And under your name, there's trivia, just one bit of trivia, and it is that you were the first paying customer on opening day of the first Planet Hollywood location, which was located in 57th Street, New York. How did that bit of trivia make it onto IMDb? Did you put it on there? Who put that up there?
Because the guy who went with me is an old friend who put it on.
Oh, Dan Milanio. Like, it's the fact that it mentioned it, I was like, is he like some Hollywood talent?
Actually, it was Josh Sussman who put it on there. Because he just loves that story so much, and he surprised me one day, and I was like, "Why did you do that? Did you have to do that's not?" I didn't know if I love that, but whatever. It's not like anything to be ashamed of. But yeah, we were. We went into the original Planet Hollywood was not the one that exists in New York City today in Times Square. Many people may remember that it was on 57th Street, and it was much smaller, but it was a big deal because, you know, it was 1991. I want to say, and you know, you got Schwarzenegger, Stallone, Bruce Willis opening a new restaurant with all movie props in it. That was like the coolest thing in the world. So we were like, we have to be the first, and we waited all night to do so.
I could not let that pass me by without asking you that one. So, I suppose
the chicken crunch. The chicken crunch was what I ordered, which is still on the menu today.
There we go. There's the second bit of trivia that can be added. If a listener is going to be enthusiastic and go do that, they can add that bit on.
But you know, they're all gone, right? They're all gone except for the Times Square one, and I believe, is there one in Vegas?
I think there's one in Vegas still. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think there's one actually a sort of a quick Planet Hollywood quickie spot in the LAX airport. And then that's it.
There we go. No one is going to ever doubt your knowledge of Planet Hollywood.
It holds a special place in my heart.
And finally, what's coming up next for you? You touched on something a little bit there. Is this going to be something that we're going to maybe have to wait a little while to see? Or is there something maybe coming a bit sooner that we can look forward to?
Oh, well, there's a bunch of stuff on the table right now. There's the one I'm writing with Sean, which is just like I mentioned, an unconventional love story that we also took out of the Idea Vault. It was one of those stories that we actually came up with on the way. Excuse me, on the way to the Palm Springs Film Festival to show Starlet in 2012, and we were in the car, and as we always do, like whenever you're hanging out with creative friends like that, you might come up with like 10 different movie ideas any given road trip, just half of them just joking around. And that was one of them. And it always stuck with us. We always wanted to do, it's a little different, for Sean, and the movies that he's made. And we're really excited about it. But we're taking a real slow burn approach to it, because Sean, again, is all about the research, and he is really doing a deep dive for this one. I've made occasional trips to join in, but Sean is just taking the lead on the research mission on this one, while I'm, like I said, doing a couple of other side projects here as well, at least trying to get some traction on some of those, and things are looking up for those. And so we'll see what happens. Fingers crossed. There's no guarantees, and even when things look promising, they have a habit of, just like in the movies, taking these left curveball turns that you don't expect, and then all of a sudden you're doing another project that you didn't expect. So, but that's the goal for me, I want to continue to do the Sean Baker vision, and also flip flop to the more mainstream side of things.
Well, I'm looking forward to whatever you do next, and thank you so much. It's great to have the Florida Project on. As you were mentioning, you inspire a lot of artwork and tattoos. Obviously our podcast is an obvious play on the Florida Project, so it's been absolutely amazing to chat with one of you today about this film, and it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for talking with me.
You're welcome, but do you know that until you just said that, I didn't make the connection that you got? That's amazing!
There you go. See, now you're going to be hitting yourself going, how did I not notice?
Yeah, because I figured you guys were maybe around way before us, the movie. That's awesome.
No, we've only been going on the go since November last year. And it was like, we were thinking like, at one point we're like, we want to kind of mention that we're sort of doing the A24 films. Can we even mention them? Will they try and bring us down? Oh, we'll just go for it. And it was like, what are we going to call it? And I was like, we've got to go with the A24 project. It's the play on one of their most popular films. It makes sense that we're kind of doing this project, going through the films, trying to talk with the people involved. It seemed like the perfect fit.
Well, Lee, wait, while we're on the subject, I know that was a great sign-off, but you do know that the Florida Project was based on what Walt called Walt Disney World.
I do indeed, yeah. I learned that also from, I think that was when I checked IMDb trivia after I saw the Florida Project for the first time, that was the sort of the name for the land development down there.
Yeah, great, because a lot of people still are finding that out, and also it was sort of a double meaning with our film, because the projects are sort of known as like sort of low-income housing here, and so this was their version of the projects, living in the motels, and so we love that double meaning. And originally, here's a little bit of trivia, fun fact, if you will, that it was originally a triple meaning, and we were going to have this sort of loose narrative thread in the film where Mooney had a summer project of getting her first kiss, and that was when it was going to be a story between her and a little boy who was the son of a businessman that was visiting from out of town and staying at a more expensive hotel across the way. But then things changed from there. But so it would originally been a triple meaning title. But that's cool that you guys did. That's awesome.
There you go. So I never knew that bit of trivia about that extra meaning, that there was going to be this little boy potentially involved. That's the first time I've heard that story. So today's been a school day in many ways.
Yeah, we kind of drifted away from that little romance aspect of it and made the characters a little younger, and just wanted to do this really. All three films so far with Sean, Starlet, Tangerine, the Florida Project, they're all friendship stories, and we really wanted to stick to. We called it our little friendship trilogy, and so we really like the idea of this. These two little girls forming a bond like that.
That's magic. Well, honestly, thank you so much. It's been an absolute treat to talk with you, and I'm looking forward to putting this episode out there, because it's been a real hoot for me. I've loved every minute of it.
Oh, thank you so much, Lee, and to Dallas, and can't wait to listen to all these others. I have to catch up now.